Hey everyone, it's John, and we recently hit 5,000 subscribers, which is crazy. Thank you so much for your support, it really means a lot. As a way of saying thanks, I thought it'd be fun to do something a little more laid back, something a little different. And I've always wanted to do a tier list, and thought this would be a great opportunity to do one. My videos are usually pretty objective and fact-based, but not this one. This is going to be my personal ranking of all the coaster types in RollerCoaster Tycoon 2. If you want a completely objective ranking, I recommend going and checking out Marcel's video on the topic. And I also recommend checking out Tube Cody's tier list, as I believe he was the first one to do one of these videos. So some of the factors I'm going to be considering when it comes to ranking these coaster types is 1, how fun they are to build in scenarios. Mostly going to be focused on scenario play, and really just how much enjoyment I get out of building them. 2, how well I feel they represent the coaster they were inspired by, because, come on, that's my thing. Also aesthetics, how nice they are to look at, how cool the design is. And another big thing is how emblematic they are of RollerCoaster Tycoon. Like when I think of RollerCoaster Tycoon, do I think of this coaster type? Is this a classic RCT coaster? Or do I look at it and think, oh yeah, that's in the game. Forgot about that one. And finally, of course, how good are they? Do they have good stats? Do they attract a lot of guests? Do they make you money? This isn't all fun and games. You gotta beat the scenario. So that'll play into it. All right, so we're moving alphabetically through the list, which means we're starting with the air-powered vertical coaster. So it looks great. I really love the look of the towers and the level to vertical track pieces that they have. I love the look of the top hat as well. And the trains look really, really similar to the SNS Thrust Air 2000 trains, which is really cool, especially since there aren't any of those left. On top of that, it's got great stats. You can charge really high prices. All in all, it's a good coaster type, but the big thing that drags it down for me is that there's very little layout variety. You only got turns and those top hats. That's it. So not really a whole lot of fun to design. But again, because of its good stats, can't put it too low. So we're going to put it into the C tier. Up next, we got the Bobsleigh. This one's honestly kind of similar in my eyes to the air-powered vertical coaster in that it looks great, but you can't really do a whole lot with it. You can only build straight, gentle drops and turns, which, makes all of your designs kind of look the same. All a bunch of helices. Plus, it can fly off of the track, which also limits your designs. I will say it is a bit iconic, I think more so than the air-powered vertical coaster. The ride in Iceberg Islands especially comes to mind here. That being said, it's, not the best ride out there. I'm going to put this one into the D tier. Up next, we got the compact inverted coaster. As you all know, this was based off of one of the worst coasters ever built, the Vekoma SLC, but despite that, I quite like this one. It's got a great variety of track pieces with all different inversions that you can create. It's fairly inexpensive to build, which means you can build a massive thrill coaster in scenarios pretty easily with this one. Honestly, I think it would be a really great coaster type if it wasn't for the existence of the inverted roller coaster, which of course we'll see a bit later. Because of that, I'm going to put this one into the B tier. Next, we have the Corkscrew Coaster. So I guess first I should start off by saying I don't build microcoasters in scenarios. That's just not how I like to play. I know some people like to do that, and because of that, they place this coaster really highly in tier lists. That said, still going to place it pretty high. It's got a great variety of track pieces, really fun to design. I guess like the compact inverted coaster, with the half loops and half corkscrews, you can really do a lot when it comes to inversions. And I think it's very realistic. Honestly, I feel like the experience of riding an arrow looper is probably as close as you would get to riding a RollerCoaster Tycoon coaster in real life, with those janky transitions and overall kind of, pieced together ride experience. And it's a classic. You look at this is one of those classic coaster types that I think of when I think of the original RollerCoaster Tycoon. So because of that, again, not my favorite ride to design, not the one that will make you the most money, but it's a phenomenal coaster, and we're going to put it into the A tier. All right, up next, got the flying coaster. So this one was tough. it's the first B&M we're seeing, and it looks great like all the other rides inspired by B&M coasters. Really like the track design, love the look of the 4-across seating, but I personally think that it's held back by its lack of special track elements. So it has half loops, yes, and it has the inline twists, but it doesn't have large half loops. And because of that, I think it's hard to make realistic looking flying coasters without cheats. And really, those are the only two special track elements, is the small half loop and the inline twist, which I guess is fairly realistic to the coaster type. But again, missing those large half loops makes it tough to build the rides that I want to build. Also, I don't see this as one of the iconic coaster types, and I think that's part of the reason is because it was added in RollerCoaster Tycoon 2, and I think this is going to be a kind of a theme throughout this video, is that a lot of the RCT2 rides, to me, just aren't as iconic as the RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 rides. In the end, still a decent coaster type, just really not one of my favorites to build, and I don't really build a lot of them, so because of that, I'll put it in the C tier. Up next, we have the Giga Coaster, and so this is another tough one for me, because I know people love this ride. People think of it very highly. I do love the trains, love the track. I think it looks very spot on to the early Infinite Mega coasters. I don't love the lack of a vertical track section. So because of that, I don't really build steep cable lifts, because it kind of makes the first drop and hill look ridiculous. Just this, this little steep pyramid that you can build. It doesn't resemble Millennium Force, which this ride was clearly based off of. It's also expensive, which is fine, again, because it has godlike stats. But like the flying coasters, not really what I think of when I think of classic RollerCoaster Tycoon coasters. Again, despite all of these drawbacks, it is objectively one of the best coasters in the game when it comes to stats. And, it's fun to design a massive coaster every once in a while. But yeah, I really don't build these much. I had to really dig through my scenario list in order to find one to feature in this video. Because of that, I'm going to put in the B tier. All right, so from one controversial take to another. So next we got the Heartline Twister. So yeah, I'll start off by saying, it's got the worst stats in the game by far. It's essentially not worth building. That being said, I really love the look of them, and I think it's such a unique design amongst the rest of the coasters. I think part of the reason is because it's very faithful to the Togo Heartline coaster, which is a very uniquely designed coaster, and I kind of enjoy building them in a weird way. They don't take up a lot of space, just that, one row that you have to build on top of. I usually build them as a throwaway coaster after I've kind of already beaten this scenario, but still, I'm hesitant to put it in the F tier. I think there are a couple coasters that I dislike more than this, and I'll save those for the F tier, so I'm gonna put this into the E tier. All right, next we got the Hyper Coaster, and it looks the part, it looks great. It's expensive, something to consider. If you want to build an actual Hyper Coaster, that is. I guess even smaller designs can end up being pretty expensive. And it is a classic, and this is one of those classic rides in my mind, with vertical views, with, the big one screaming through the Blackpool Pleasure Beach scenario. But really, objectively, it's not as good as the Hyper Twister, which we'll see a little bit later. It's definitely just, an inferior version of that. Because of that, I'm going to put this into the C tier. And by see a little bit later, I mean, we're going to see the Hyper Coaster right now. Here it is. Because I love the look of the 4-across trains, even love the look of the Giovanola trains. Thought it was really great that they included that in RCT2. It is very expensive to build ones that look good. Because of that, I really only build these towards the end of certain scenarios, when you're making a ton of money and you can afford to build a big coaster type. But this is usually the big coaster type that I go for. They really churn through guests, they can make you a lot of money, and again, they look great. They're fun to design when you do have the cash, and yeah, guests love them. So yeah, gonna put this one to the B tier. Solid ride, too expensive to build that frequently. Next we have the inverted Hairpin coaster. So you're gonna learn this by the end of the video, but in scenario play, I love any rides with small one-tile turns, and especially roller coasters, because you can really fit them into any area of the park that you have. You can get really creative with your designs. I love that it's based off of a really obscure coaster type, one that I didn't know existed until I started making videos on the topic. But also, I don't really find it as aesthetically pleasing as the other coasters with small turns. So kind of judging them all together in a little box, this is kind of on the lower side of the small turn coasters for me. So because of that, I'm going to put it into the B tier. Up next is the Inverted Impulse. I always forget that this coaster's in the game. So like the air-powered coaster, it's really not very fun to design because it has very limited track pieces. You can build a shuttle pretty easily, but that's not that fun. And if you do want to build a full circuit coaster, it can be really frustrating because it doesn't have any turns. The only turns that you can do are on vertical track sections, which makes it pretty tough to design. Unlike the air-powered coaster, I don't think the designs that you build actually look super realistic. Even the shuttles, because of the lack of custom supports in the vanilla version of the game, they never look great, and I don't like building them that much. That said, I do build them more than a few of the other coaster types, which we'll see later, which I'm reserving for the F tier. So this is going to join the Heartline Twister into the E tier. Up next, we got the Inverted Coaster, and this is a good one. I love this coaster type. It's got a great variety of inversions. You can build small designs really easily with the small half loops and corkscrew pieces. You can build monstrous designs with the large half loop pieces. There's just a ton of flexibility with what you can do. It's got great stats. It is a bit expensive, but again, you can build really nice looking small designs earlier in scenarios, or just ball out on a huge Alpengeist looking ride later on in a scenario as well. You have the flexibility. And a little bit personal for me, being in inverted coasters is what originally got me into roller coasters. This was the ride that I initially obsessed over as a little kid, and I gotta put it into the S tier. All right, coming down the thrill a little bit, we got the Junior Coaster. Even though it's not as thrilling as the inverted coaster, this is still another classic. I think this is probably one of the top 3 classic rides in the game. Those ladybug trains are iconic. And it's usually one of the first rides I build in scenarios. It's incredibly cheap. You can get decent stats out of them if you know what you're doing. Obviously not phenomenal stats, but still for the price, you can do a pretty good job. And those trains are adorable. Come on. It's also one of the few realistic family coasters in the game that you can build. And because of that, I have to put it into the A tier. Up next, we got the Laydown Coaster. So, cousin to the Flying Coaster. This is, of course, based off of the Vekoma Flying Dutchmans. Might be controversial, but I like this ride better than the Flying Coaster in the game. I think it's got a greater variety of track pieces with the full vertical loops, the half corkscrews. And because of that, I think it is more true to the ride that inspired this. I know the Flying Coaster was introduced into the game before there were, really massive flying coasters out there, but still, I do have to kind of lay that criticism down. But in the end, I have more fun designing these compared to the Flying Coaster, and because of that, I'm going to place it a little bit higher into the B tier. Next, we have the LIM Launched Coaster. Oh, yeah, there's something about this ride that I do not like designing them. Yeah, the trains look awesome. They really resemble Premier's trains with the little fins and the over-the-shoulder restraints and the shape of the front car. But I just don't find it as aesthetically pleasing as some of the other coaster types. Again, I think like the Inverted Impulse Coaster might have to do with the supports. I feel like Premier's rides have, very large custom support structures, which you can't build in RollerCoaster Tycoon. But it's not all that. I think the inline twists look a little funky compared to how they look in real life. And it might also be a bit biased because I like the look of rides with lift hills. In fact, I prefer them oftentimes over launch coasters in this game. But I do like making them every once in a while. I think it's fun to make like Flight of Fear or Spaghetti Bowl style coasters, try to cram as much track into one space as possible. So, not my least favorite coaster type in the game, but not my favorite either. I'm going to put it into the D tier. Next, we got the looping coaster, and I mean, this might be the most iconic ride in the game, maybe with the junior coaster. You got Diamond Heights, you got Three Monkeys Park. I mean, so many great pre-built looping coasters in the original RollerCoaster Tycoon scenarios. I mean, the loops themselves look fantastic. You know, it's one of the few examples in RollerCoaster Tycoon of a coaster type or a coaster element that has a very specific support design that, you know, basically directly references the ride that was based off of in real life. You know, I said before, I don't really build micro coasters and scenarios, but, you know, even I can get behind a shuttle loop every once in a while. They're pretty fun. You know, in scenarios, they're relatively cheap to build. So with the junior coaster, this is usually one of the first coasters that I do build. It's fun interlocking loops. It's just a fun ride. I'm going to put it into the A tier. Next, we got the Mine Ride. And so this is another RollerCoaster Tycoon 2 coaster type. And honestly, it's another one I forget that exists. So I think it's great that there's a powered coaster in RollerCoaster Tycoon. And I've seen some really cool Mine Ride designs out there. You know, the fact that it kind of becomes pre-themed is pretty cool. But honestly, and you know, people can disagree with me on this, but I'm one of those people who don't consider power coasters to be true roller coasters, and that's fine. You know, I guess that alone would put it pretty low in my eyes. But I don't find them all that fun to design either. I feel like it's like designing a car ride, which is fun, but it's not a roller coaster. I feel like when you want to build a roller coaster, you want to build one with drops and hills that's gravity powered and inversions and, you know, stuff like that. To be honest, I don't think I've ever actually built one of these, and I've struggled while making this video to find a scenario where this is even available to build. And yeah, all that being said, I'm gonna have to put this one into the F tier. I don't like this coaster type. Next, we got the Mine Train coaster, not to be confused with the Mine Ride, very different. This one, I think, is iconic. I think with the looping coaster, the junior coaster, this is one of the, like, 3 RCT1 icons. Maybe you can also include the Corkscrew Coaster, but definitely the Mine Train coaster. Dynamite Dunes comes to mind. It's also available in a bunch of other scenarios. Katie's World, I believe. Aesthetically, I think it looks great. You know, from the supports to the track to the ride vehicles. I feel like it really fits the mine aesthetic really well. And I guess like the Mine Ride, it comes pre-themed, really can anchor western or frontier areas of your park really well. Are some downsides to it though. The track pieces are limited, so there's no banked sloping turns. And it is a little bit more expensive to build than you would imagine. And it's tough to really like satisfactorily use in scenarios because of that. You can't build large themed mine trains that easily in scenario play. But it's a great coaster type, and I wouldn't be able to put it anywhere lower than the A tier. Next is the mini coaster. So I really want to like the mini coaster, but it does frustrate me. In scenarios, it is really hard to build interesting layouts for this ride since the cars lose speed so easily. I believe they have a really low weight, which causes them to really just lose speed throughout the course incredibly quickly. So not only that, but you know, the cars are fairly low capacity, so it won't actually make you a ton of money in the end. The track design does look great, and you know, it is frustrating to build. It's also really cheap, and I find it a bit of a challenge whenever I do decide to build one of these. You know, making an interesting layout in such a way that the car can actually complete the course. Because of that, I can't put it insanely low, but it's still not great. I'm gonna have to put it into the D tier. Next, the mini suspended coaster. So, yeah, this one's got all the problems of the mini coaster, but even worse. The cars lose speed even more easily, and they have an even lower capacity, and on top of that, you can only do gentle slopes. You know, there's not a lot of variety in terms of designs here. They all look pretty much the same, and I don't find it fun to design. It doesn't make you any money. I have to put it into the F tier. I'm sorry, mini suspended coaster. All right, here we got the multi-dimension coaster. So this is another RCT2 coaster type, and I swear, I'm so sorry. I know there were probably RCT2 fans out there, but obviously I love RCT2. But the coaster types that were introduced in that game, I never realized about. Yeah, I don't like them as much as the ones from the original game. Truthfully, I almost never build this ride, probably because there are less RCT2 scenarios, and I just don't play them as much. I feel like when I do revisit scenarios, I play the RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 scenarios. But I do love how the trains look, and the track elements are incredibly faithful to the ride's inspiration. Like, the model of X in the game looks pretty much identical to the one in real life. Like, it looks great. When I do build it, I have fun doing so, which, keeps it out of the bottom tiers for me. I'm going to put it into the D tier. Up next, we got the reverse Freefall coaster. Not a ton to say about this one. It's similar in my eyes to the air-powered vertical coaster, but a little bit worse. Does it look great? Yes. The vertical spike looks good. Again, it's got that level to vertical track element that I think looks great. The cars look good, but is it fun to build? Absolutely not. Doesn't make a lot of money. Does okay there, but not as well as a lot of the other coaster types, such as the air-powered vertical coaster. However, I do make them a lot in scenarios, since they don't take up a ton of space, and again, they're so kind of brainless to design. You can throw them down anywhere, and you'll have a ride that'll eat up some gas, make a little bit of money. Because of that, I'll put it into the D tier. Next, we got the reverser, and mixed feelings on this one. On one hand, I don't really build it that much, and for whatever reason, I don't really find it aesthetically pleasing to build, especially compared to some of the other wood coaster types in the game. Might just be because it only has gentle slopes. The reverser turntables look they make it hard to create pleasing lines, I feel like, when you are building this ride. And, not only does it have limited track pieces, but it's one of those rides that can fly off the track and kill guests, which also limits your designs. All that being said, it's pretty sick. The reverser section, while not looking the best, it is very cool, and the ride is just such a crazy deep cut from roller coaster history. Because of that, I really can't put it anywhere below the C tier. Yeah, let's put it there. Next, we got the side friction coaster, which you pretty much take everything I just said about the reverser and apply it here. I do think that I find the side friction coaster slightly more aesthetically pleasing to design and fun to design, mostly because I kind of know how these rides looked in real life. The figure 8 layouts, the shallow drops. There's a historical precedent in my mind whenever I'm designing these rides. And it's also very cheap and has a better throughput than the reverser roller coaster, but I don't think I can put it any higher. I'm still gonna put it into the C tier. All right, next we have the spinning Wild Mouse. So again, I'm biased towards these type of coaster types since their compact turns make them really easy and fun to put into parks. And yeah, this is an RCT2 design, but I kind of like it. The cars look really cool. The spin animation is awesome and, really unlike any of the other rides in the game. Whenever it's available, which again, I don't play a lot of scenarios that have the spinning Wild Mouse, but when it's there, I'll build it. I'll always build this. But I won't put it too high since I do like the other Wild Mice better. I feel like notably, the spinning Wild Mouse can only do gentle slopes, which, puts it a little bit below the other Wild Mice for me. Because of that, I'm going to put it into the B tier. Next, we have the Spiral Coaster. So another one that I have mixed feelings about. The spiral lift is pretty cool. Doesn't do a whole lot for me, but it's fun. And the trains do look good. I just don't get very excited to build the Spiral Coaster. I feel like I can do a decent job explaining why I don't like other coaster types, but this one I really have trouble explaining. Might just be because the large trains look a little bit out of place on the track that resembles the mini coaster track. I think it is actually the mini coaster track, which has really small cars. But these really long cars just look a little bit off to me. I really can't explain it. I would maybe enjoy it more if it was possible to build compact coaster layouts, so you can make rides that resemble Jetstars or Jumbo Jets. But again, the limits of RollerCoaster Tycoon, you can only really build rides that resemble the Whizzer, which is fine. Nothing against the Whizzer over here. I guess I'd just rather my big sprawling coaster or family coaster to be something else other than the spiral coaster. Look, having a hard time with this one. For me, bit middle of the road. I'm gonna put into the seats here. Next we have the stand-up coaster, and this ride I have much more firm feelings about. I think it's fun to design with all of its different track elements, but its stats are so naturally high that it becomes really hard to build creative layouts. It's really easy to get extreme intensity or really high intensity. And it's also pretty expensive. And there's a far better alternative in the stand-up Twister coaster. Because of that, I'm gonna put this one into the D tier. Next, we have the Steel Wild Mouse, and yeah, I've alluded to this a couple times, but I love building Wild Mouse coasters. And this is all the positives of the spinning Wild Mouse, but it has access to steep slopes. Not just steep slopes, but it has the level too steep track piece, which is pretty rare in the game. It's wildly easy to fit into any space. It's got great stats. You can charge really high prices. It's pretty cheap to build, and the mouse cars are adorable. I mean, come on. What more do you want in a ride? This is going into the S tier. Next, we have the Steeplechase. So I see this as another one of those iconic rides. You know, it's at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Giggle Downs, I think, is a really iconic scenario. And it looks pretty great. You know, I think the horse vehicles especially look great. Yeah, those are really the only positives that it has going for it. It's not that fun to build, mostly with its limited track pieces being the culprit. And it has a really low throughput with its 2-passenger cars. I do think it's fun that, you know, it kind of has a real-world precedent for dueling and racing, but, you know, that doesn't help it all that much. I can't quite put it into the lowest tier, but I think it sits comfortably in the E tier. Here we have the Swinging Suspended Coaster. You know, this is one of the top 3 icons, but I think this is another icon for me. I find them really fun to design, mostly because you don't have to worry about unbanked turns, since, you know, there are no banked turns. All of your turns are going to be unbanked. And the car physics look really cool, like the way the cars swing out on the turns and seeing them swinging side to side on straight sections after turns. I do know, you know, objectively, it's not one of the better coaster types. It can get pretty extreme stats pretty quickly, but I'm also a bit biased because, you know, the Big Bad Wolf, which is a real-life suspended coaster that used to operate at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, was one of my favorite roller coasters growing up. And I'm sorry, I'm putting this into the A tier. Next, we have a coaster that, you know, shouldn't be too controversial. We got the Twister coaster. And we're combining all the different variations of the Twister here. So floorless, stand-up Twister, sit-down Twister, it's all here. And honestly, I think this is probably the easiest decision I had to make on this entire list. There's so many different track pieces, and they all look great, from the barrel rolls to the large half loops. You got quarter loops, you got vertical track sections, and, I mean, you got the launch lift hill, which is absolutely broken. And because of all of that, I mean, you can really make rides that resemble real-life B&M loopers. On top of that, its stats are great, and it'll make you a ton of money if you can afford to build one. That really, I guess, being one of the few downsides to this coaster type. They are pretty expensive, but they'll make you a ton of money. And if you can afford to put one into a park, you're going to do it. Even on a small scale, I mean, these rides just are so much fun to design for scenario play. I need to put it into the S tier. It's an easy S tier. Next, we have the Vertical Drop Coaster. So, I really want to love the Vertical Drop Coaster as much as I love the Twister Coaster, but I can't for a few reasons. I think the biggest reason for me is its track piece selection. You know, the Twister has everything. It's got the quarter loops, it's got large half loops, but the Vertical Drop Coaster in RollerCoaster Tycoon 2 only has access to a small vertical loop. And, you know, for a ride that you're building, you know, well over 100 feet tall, even into the 200-foot range, it's kind of a ridiculous version to have. Open RCT 2 adds the large half loops, but still, it makes it really hard to get creative with your layouts in RCT 1 and RCT 2, and basically impossible to recreate rides found in the real world, unless you're building Oblivion, which, you know, was the ride that it was based off of, but still, it hasn't aged all that well, I guess. However, I still find them really fun to design. The holding brake looks great, you got the steep lift hill pieces, and the trains look really cool. Not only do the trains look cool, but it has monster capacity, can make a ton of money in scenarios. So because of that, I'm going to put it into the A tier. Next, we have the Virginia Reel, or I guess in my eyes, the wooden spinning mouse. So like all the other mouse rides, it's really easy to fit into different areas of your park with the tiny turns. And this one is crazy cheap to build, even more so than the other mouse models. I also love the look of the wooden supports in this game, and it's another historical deep cut. I think it's awesome that it's in the game, like the reverser coaster, side friction coaster. It's cool to see these really old, ancient, some of them completely extinct rides living on through RollerCoaster Tycoon. So I'm going to put it into the B tier. All right, we made it to the W's, which means we're almost done. First W is the water coaster. So this ride might not be as iconic as some of the other coaster types, but it's definitely one of the more unique ones since you have access to the different water elements. So I do find these fun to design, but not really as a roller coaster. I guess more like a water ride, like kind of how I like building log flumes. It's the same way I feel about the water coaster. It's a fun water ride to design, but not really a fun roller coaster to design, since the cars lose speed really quickly through its track sections. Also, its stats aren't great, and again, you don't have a lot of room to play with between splashdowns because of how quickly the cars lose speed. But then again, I mean, super unique ride, still find them fun. I'm gonna put it into the C tier. Next, we have the wooden coaster, and I'll come in and say it. This is my favorite coaster type in the game. I've built it in every single scenario where it's available. It looks fantastic, from the supports, which, I mean, Planet Coaster is a great game, but, Frontier didn't get the wooden coaster supports down as well as Chris Sawyer and Simon Foster did in RollerCoaster Tycoon 1. The supports here look incredible. I mean, especially when you can add in the additional support sections from the scenery, you can really create some amazing looking rides from the wooden coaster. It's got a just tremendous variety of track pieces. You want to build a twister coaster? Yeah, you can build that. You want to build an out and back? Yeah. You want to build a looping coaster? Why not? Want a splashdown? It's all there. Plus, I mean, it's got great stats, and it's pretty cheap to design when you build a smaller coaster type, and it's got a high throughput, make you a ton of money. It'll look fantastic, and it's the best. Come on, it's the best. We're putting it into the S tier. All right, we reached the ends with the wooden wild mouse. Might start to sound like a broken record here, but it's a wild mouse. I love wild mouse coasters, and I love the look of the wooden support, so I guess it shouldn't be a surprise at this point. I love this ride. It does have a lower throughput than the steel wild mouse, since you can only fit 2 passengers per car, and it does lose speed pretty quickly. Like, you don't want to build big drops. And it does also have a high intensity rating, which makes it a little bit more difficult to build, but I love it. I think it looks great. You can really fit into any part of the park, and I need to put it into the A tier. I'm sorry. If there's any Wild Mouse haters out there, I'm sorry. Yeah, so there we have it. This is the list. Again, just my opinion. You can let me know why I'm wrong in the comments. And thank you everyone again for 5,000 subscribers. It's really unbelievable. I never would have imagined how far this channel would have come since I first started uploading coaster history videos to a few dozen views a couple of years ago. Now to get, 20,000 views on videos, and even the coaster history video is getting, a couple thousand views here and there. That's really exciting. I just, thank you all for your support, and for liking, subscribing, commenting, even if you're just, if you're not doing any of those, even if you're just watching, I appreciate that. It really means a lot. So yeah, thanks so much for watching this video. Let me know if you liked it. I mean, happy to do other videos like this in the future as well, if people want to see them. So yeah, thanks so much again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.